Before we get to the story around Mozambique, Daniel, the fact of the matter is there were two former chairs of the Federal Reserve and the current one on a panel together today. And Jerome Powell, it seems, has drawn a line, given the criticism that he's been facing from the White House. Tell us more about that.
Yes, surrounded by these two pillars of US monetary policy over the last decade, he was asked whether he would stand down if Donald Trump told him to leave. His simple answer was no. I think that this represents a clear line in the sand, as you were saying, really toughening up his stance on the politicization or potential politicization of the Federal Reserve by the White House. He's really saying that, legally speaking, the president, unless there's some egregious issue, has no grounds to simply fire him. Aside from that, the markets were cheered by a few sentences that he gave to suggest that he would be willing to adjust Fed policy, presumably to the downside on the interest rate side, if there was a potentially large ramification for markets or for the global economy. This is a slight diversion from the conventional monetary policy, and it appears to be a way for him to sort of project some kind of insurance policy, in a sense, to the markets, to say, look, you know, we're not going to do anything to fundamentally alter the dynamics here. If there were to be a major market disruption caused by us, we would take that into account and act accordingly. So the markets loved that, and I think they loved the fact that he robustly defended the independence of the institution.
Indeed, we'll certainly be keeping a close eye on that story. But let's get back to this business of the indictments. At least as far as we know, 5 individuals arrested across the world, South Africa, London and elsewhere, even at JFK in New York, essentially on indictments issued by the Department of Justice. But walk us through where American jurisdiction lies here. Why are the Americans taking the lead on prosecuting this?
Well, the London Financial Conduct Authority had a look at this, but they, for some reason unknown to the public, dropped the case for a while. Maybe they're going to take it up if they have evidence provided for them by their US counterparts in the prosecutor's office in the Eastern District of New York. But the case is clearly in US jurisdiction for various reasons. For example, Credit Suisse, the bank that housed these 3 individuals that are alleged to have been a core part of this conspiracy. Credit Suisse has major US operations, as does the Russian bank VTB Capital, which isn't named in this indictment but has been in previous press reports, having issued some loans following Credit Suisse's actions for Mozambique's projects. And on top of that, they transferred money in US dollars, which meant they had to have a correspondent bank in the United States in order to do that. So in a sense, the money went through US jurisdiction. Along with that, there are investors here in the United States who have at some point held those loans or currently do.
All right then. So this case also does point to this elaborate system of kickbacks that involved about $200 million being diverted from that loan figure that we know now, the headline number of about $2 billion or so. From the indictment that's been issued by the DOJ, how exactly did these kickbacks move around?
Well, it's very simple. There was a company called Privinvest in the UAE, which was basically handling the whole network of loans. So they took in the loans, the value provided to them in one case by Credit Suisse and in some cases by VTB. They then divvied up the loans, so provided money to 3 different organizations that had been created in Mozambique for the purpose, ostensibly, of creating these maritime projects. Some of that money was diverted to those institutions. Some of it, according to the indictment, was diverted merely for the payment of bribes to Mozambican officials and to the Credit Suisse bankers and to the middlemen.
All right then. So Credit Suisse, though, as an institution, from what I've seen, is not facing any charges. It's not facing any liability here. Why is that the case?
Well, so far it's clear from the indictment that these three individuals withheld a great deal of information from the officials within Credit Suisse, who are meant to detect and therefore recommend that loans don't go ahead on the basis of fraud or risk or any of those other compliance issues. That there was a conspiracy to hide that information from Credit Suisse's own individuals. But this doesn't mean that Credit Suisse is out of the woods. It may well be in the course of these investigations, and indeed if the US authorities are able to question those involved, that Credit Suisse does have some level of liability. That's very important for Mozambique, by the way. If Credit Suisse has some legal liability, that means that Mozambique could potentially say that the bank has to be responsible for paying back some of this money instead of negotiating a very expensive set of new loans to try to carry Mozambique through this very difficult period.
Indeed, and it is an extraordinarily difficult period here. But one last question for you. 5 individuals essentially now having been arrested. Let's assume for argument's sake that they are found guilty in the United States. What sort of penalties could they face?
Very, very high penalties. So, for example, in the case of a wire fraud, they could face up to 2 years. Securities fraud, which they face up to 5 years. And then for the violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, essentially bribing foreign officials, up to 20 years. And then allegations of money laundering, charges there could face 20 years. So they are in very serious trouble.
Indeed. We'll see how all of this plays out. Thank you very much for the update. That's Daniel Rangers there live in Washington, D.C. Now then, on to East Africa. Uganda has increased its exports over the last year by over $350 million. Data from the Bank of Uganda shows that the value of exports went up from about $3.2 billion in the 2016-2017 fiscal year to about $3.5 billion in the following fiscal year. Now, the growth is partly driven by the increasing reliance on Uganda for food supplies by her neighbours in East Africa. CGTN's Michael Baleke filed this report.
Thomas Yiga prepares a consignment for export. Fresh foods, fruits and vegetables now comprise of Uganda's biggest export products in terms of volumes.
What gives us an advantage is that our products are best or are good compared to what other countries produce.
Yiga exports much of his fruits and vegetables to the European Union, Canada, the UK and recently the Middle East.
We have the demands that we can't satisfy. For example, in Dubai, they need a lot of avocados. We take Oman, generally. We have Oman, Bahrain, and some other countries in the Middle East. So it's a growing market, and the exports generally are growing.
Other key export products, according to figures from Bank of Uganda, include coffee, tea, sorghum, soap, vegetable oil, and fish. Despite the challenges of insecurity in South Sudan, the DR Congo and Burundi, Uganda is registering a significant increase in regional trade, largely with the East African Community partner states. Uganda is selling much of its corn and beans to its neighbors. The growth, according to trade experts, signifies the importance of regional integration.
The EAC and COMESA, the regional market, has become strong for us. Two, that not only is it taking food and primary products, but we're exporting manufactured products.
Trade experts say the export of value-added products is creating more jobs for locals, but also earning the country more money. Uganda is also looking to tap into new markets, such as China, to promote non-food products like tourism.
Over the last 30 years and more, China has gotten more than 400 million people out of poverty. So their incomes have risen. And when incomes rise, this is an opportunity to also begin to travel, to go and relax and chill. And Uganda is one of the countries you want to come and chill in.
However, as exports grow, Uganda's import bill remains significantly high, largely for the import of raw materials, but also cheap alternatives to locally manufactured products. But for exporters like Thomas Yiga, keeping the quality of their products is key in penetrating and maintaining their export markets. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Right, then, quick update for you from the situation in Zimbabwe. The government there apparently seems to be on the verge of breaking a deadlock with striking union doctors, following a meeting between the country's First Lady on one hand and the leaders of the Hospital Doctors Association on the other. We understand that meeting ended in a willingness to put the patient first. Now, prior to this meeting, the government had invited applications for internships from candidates who'd completed at least 5 years in medical school in a bid to mitigate a countrywide medical emergency.
Casualty wards where the infirm are meant to find relief are turning them away as a doctor's strike enters its 5th week. Patients are being referred to private facilities, while those who don't have the means are left stranded.
We were told that they can't help us here because there aren't any doctors. When I heard that, I didn't know what to do or where to go next. That's why I had to sit down here and try to gather my thoughts.
Juliet has accompanied her 63-year-old mother on the 267-kilometer journey from Mutare. The hospital there couldn't attend to the septic tumor growing on her leg and referred her here, where she's enduring more distress. The leg is very painful, she says. She hasn't been prescribed any medication for the pain. Her plight is unlikely to improve as doctors stay away from the wards. Government says it's met 8 of their 10 demands, including provision of adequate drugs and equipment and facilitating a duty-free vehicle import scheme. However, the main outstanding issue, a demand for payment of salaries in US dollars, is out of the government's reach. The impasse has ground operations at some facilities to a halt. This is one of the country's largest public referral hospitals where other professionals, including consultants and senior doctors, radiographers and hospital registrars, are said to have also downed their tools in solidarity with their junior counterparts. While sympathizing with their cause, desperate patients want the doctors to compromise.
There is nothing I can do to heal this wound or ease my mother's pain. It's literally rotting while I am looking on. It will end up needing amputation given how far the decay has gone.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa has cut short his annual leave to deal with the crisis. His intervention will hopefully bring the quick resolution that could save this leg and many lives that are in danger. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Right, then let's start our run through some company news in Zimbabwe. The country's largest brewing company, Delta Beverages, which is 40% owned by AB InBev, says it has abandoned a plan to only accept hard currency payments due to a crippling shortage of US dollars after talks with the government and the central bank. Now, Zimbabwe's Reserve Bank will try to provide the foreign exchange required by Delta to continue trading at current levels. Further afield, the Nigerian Stock Exchange has launched the X-Bot. It's a chatbot, essentially, that responds directly and automatically to inquiries made through Facebook Messenger. The X-Bot will be the first African Securities Exchange chatbot designed to provide market participants, especially retail investors, with convenient, fast, real-time access to data and information from the exchange. Elsewhere in Kenya, the Britam Holdings company says its net earnings for 2018 will be at least a quarter lower than the $5.2 million it recorded in the prior year, mainly due to poor stock performance and a pretty challenging business environment. Now, the firm, whose bulk of its earnings come from underwriting, issued a profit warning to its shareholders pursuant to provisions of the Capital Markets Authority on the 2nd of January this year. And finally, Nissan's former boss, chairman, I should point out, is set to appear in a court in Tokyo on Tuesday. Carlos Ghosn has requested, the hearing to learn the reason for his detention. He's reportedly expected to appear in court. This will be his first appearance ever since he was arrested about 2 months ago for financial misconduct. Earlier this week, a court again extended his detention for yet another 2 weeks. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore China's affirmation of its commitment to support development projects in Africa. and member countries of the West African Monetary Zone reach a currency swap deal. The details on that and plenty more coming up next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Naidu.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. China has expressed its readiness to continue supporting African states. That affirmation comes in the wake of a meeting on the 4th of January between China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, at the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa. Both sides have also agreed to see through the implementation of the agreed-to goals from 2018's FOCAC Forum.
It is for the second time that you are visiting the African Union headquarters in a few months, and this shows, if need be, the solid ground on which our relations are built. After the success of the FOCAC summit in Beijing, your visit comes at the most appropriate time in order to concretize the 8 initiatives launched by the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping. I just want to express satisfaction the place that China reserves for Africa and the African Union. For China, African countries are very good partners, our brothers, and through concrete action, we want to support African countries in their efforts in order to build their capacities for development. We hope that Africa will really become independent, economic independence, and as much as possible, we make the necessary efforts in order to build the capacities of African Union, hoping that the African Union will continue to be able to play its role in the development of the African continent.
During his visit to Ethiopia, the Chinese foreign minister also addressed debt trap concerns insofar as Sino-African debt is concerned. Here's what he had to say.
What is China's position when it comes to the issue of debt with the African states? Is there any tricky agreement as it's been claimed?
You see, the temporary debt difficulties facing some African countries did not come up today or yesterday. They were built up throughout history, and actually, so far, the main data from so many African countries is still from the developed countries. And the second point I want to make is that the cooperation between China and African countries is a friendly cooperation of mutual assistance. It's a type of South-South cooperation, and we follow the principles of mutual assistance in having cooperation with African countries. And in helping Ethiopia and other African countries' projects at the request of our African brothers and sisters, and we only start those projects after we have conducted feasibility studies and scientific assessments and evaluations. So our cooperation is open and transparent. And certainly how to help those African countries overcome these temporary financing difficulties. I think the answer is very clear. That is, we need to help them build up their own development capacity so as to make sure that they can generate economic growth from within their countries. At last year's FOCAC Beijing summit, China announced 8 major initiatives to help Africa to do so, and I believe that through their efforts, many of the African countries, including those that are currently facing debt difficulties, will achieve new and greater development success.
All right, then let's move on to other matters. Nigeria, Ghana and other member countries of the West African Monetary Zone are working on a national currency swap agreement that's designed to promote trade in the region. A deal to that end was announced at the end of the 9th Trade Ministers Forum in Abuja, Nigeria in November last year. Now, the currency swap deal is expected to work in a manner similar to that of existing swap lines between some of the member states like Nigeria and China's central bank, for instance. The Monetary Zone came into effect in the year 2000. It's been around for a while. It was originally designed as a monetary zone to promote trade among the member countries. All right then, so let's get you more details on this story, this monetary zone and the swap lines and how they would work. Deji Badmus is live in Lagos with more data on this particular story. So Deji, let's start with a wider context here. The Francophone countries in West Africa already have a common central bank, and they also have a common currency as well, the CFA. So what has prompted Anglophone states like Nigeria and Ghana and Liberia to move in this direction?
Well, basically, the whole essence is to promote, trade relations, to boost trade now in the region. But Rama, let's not move too very fast because, this is still a proposal. The final details have not been worked out yet. I think just like the monetary union thing that the region has been, engaged in for quite a long time now, this might still take some time because the final details are still to be worked out. But basically, the essence is to boost trade activities now within the region. As you know, a lot of trade activities going on within the region. And for Nigeria, to be candid, this if this works out fine, to some extent, I think it will be more beneficial to Nigeria, if you ask me, because Nigeria is surely the biggest player among these countries. And of course, you have Guinea there in the mix, which of course, as you know, it's a Francophone country as well.
Right. Okay. So Nigeria is the largest economy in the region. Presumably a big chunk of the trade among these countries revolves around Nigeria. So how big would these swap lines be? Who would be giving who how much cash?
Well, those details have not been worked out yet. The trade ministers didn't announce that. I think all of that will have to be worked out. We do not know, if this will be like the swap arrangement now Nigeria has in place with China. But, we can just hazard a guess that this would definitely be in favor of Nigeria, no doubt, and that when you look at the agreement as well, substantial amount of the money now that will be involved in the swap deal will be coming from Nigeria. Let's face it, most of the citizens of these other countries actually do a lot of trade with Nigeria. They come to Nigeria, for instance, to buy goods and sometimes services, of course. So it just would make better sense, for instance, if they were able to do this carry out their business activities now without resorting, without the currency bottlenecks you would normally have, because in some cases we've seen where some African countries actually resort to a third currency like the dollar to carry out their trading activities. That will be eliminated. So it means people from these other countries will be able to do, carry out their business transactions now in Nigeria using the naira, and of course Nigerian traders too who are doing businesses now in places like Ghana and some other Liberia, and of course the Gambia would be able to do their businesses now without having to bother themselves with getting, exchanging the naira, because they'll be able to get access now to the currencies of those countries. But the finer details have not been worked out yet. We're yet to know how much is going to be involved, but obviously I don't think it will be up to the size of the China-Nigeria currency swap deal.
Right. One last question for you, Deji. The fact of the matter is trade within the region has been growing relatively quickly, and that's despite the fact that there are no currency swap agreements at the moment, that these countries then have to work with a third currency, as you mentioned, like the dollar. So in that context, if trade volumes are going up and there's still trade anyway, why do we need this currency swap agreement?
Well, honestly, if you ask me, it's difficult to tell. But I think these trade ministers really understand why it's absolutely necessary to do this. Don't forget that the region has been working at achieving a single currency, and that has not been achieved. You still have the problem of the countries now involved not being able to meet with the 10 convergence criteria. So for me, it's if you ask me, Rama, I still think this is still going to be bogged down by some of those problems you have with the single monetary union problem. So we just have to wait and see how this pans out. But basically, I think for the trade ministers of these countries now, they're just basically looking at boosting trade activities now around the region. But to be candid, if you ask my personal opinion, I don't think, the trade, the volume of trade among these countries now, these countries involved, I don't think it has reached the scale where, for instance, you would require a currency swap deal. Of course, as I said, Nigeria is a big player in the region, and this will certainly favor Nigeria.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for the update. That's Deji Badmus there live in Lagos. Now, senior bankers in Britain are facing criminal charges for committing fraud during the country's financial crisis over a decade ago. Former Barclays CEO John Varley and 3 one-time colleagues are facing trial over deals with investors from Qatar to secure cash injections that, at the time, allowed the bank to survive the crisis. Barclays secured about $15 billion or so in emergency funds, most of which came from Gulf investors, as markets in the UK tanked. Now, the trial is set to start next week, Monday, and it's slated to last for up to 4 months. Now, if you've ever been to Rwanda's capital of Kigali, you'll know that referring to it as the land of 1,000 hills is very literal. There's no metaphor involved over there. It also, however, has another benefit, since the country has got great soil for growing coffee. But due to its poorly developed infrastructure for the time being, Rwanda's coffee isn't that well known outside its borders. But now, a Chinese e-commerce platform is helping to change that.
Rwanda, the land of 1,000 hills, is a perfect place for the production of coffee. However, coffee from the country is largely unknown to people outside its borders. But the situation is now taking a complete U-turn since the visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping in July last year. During the visit, several cooperation agreements between the two nations were signed. And in October 2018, Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba launched Africa's first ever electronic World Trade platform in Kigali, the capital.
After 3 months after the President Xi visited Rwanda, the EWTP was launched, which really so fast, and then it's really incredible. And we already sell our coffee to China market, and we were repaid. So to say this is really fantastic, this cooperation is a cooperation that is really working.
The project is a platform that enables small and medium-sized enterprises to participate in cross-border electronic trade. It also aims to create a relationship between both nations' customers. Some of Rwanda's coffee brands that are being sold currently on Alibaba's Tmall international platform include Gorilla Coffee, West Hills Coffee, and the Land of a Thousand Hills.
EWTP is a solution for all the program of coffee sector, and then it increased up to 30%, and 30% the income that the growers used to have.
The future of Rwanda's economic development is digital and data-driven, and the introduction of e-commerce platforms like Alibaba in the country is expected to largely contribute to the economic growth of Rwanda. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
Let's head over to North Africa now. Libya has depended heavily on revenues from exports of its vast crude reserves since the 2011 fall of longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. Since then, however, the North African nation hasn't really diversified its economy, despite enormous potential in tourism and fisheries. A ban on olive exports introduced in 2017 is just making matters a lot worse, and farmers and processors of olives are now calling on authorities to remove that ban. CGTN's Terry Wangari has more.
Stretching as far as the eye can see, groves of gnarled olive trees in northwest Libya have proudly withstood the country's devastating conflicts. But the industry of extracting olive oil, often dubbed green gold, is now under threat after Libyan authorities halted exports in a bid to protect local produce. Authorities repeatedly expressed their desire to develop the promising olive oil industry, but in Tarhuna, farmers and workers at olive presses view such pledges with skepticism.
We constantly have problems getting spare parts, which are getting expensive because of the collapse of the Libyan dinar against the dollar, and also because of the cost of the oil extraction process.
Olives heavy with oil are harvested by hand in order not to damage the trees. Laid out on huge sheets, the ripened crop is transported in flour sacks to the presses where their rich, redolent oil is carefully extracted.
Olives in Tarhuna is a family business, and the production of oil was the only resource of the community in the lean years. Olive tree is a nourishing mother. We use its oil to eat, its leaves to feed animals, and its wood for fires. All that comes from the olive tree is a blessing. When we looked at what causes the white color of this olive, we discovered that the trees came from southern Italy. Southern Italy is an olive region and young trees. And when the Italians arrived in Libya, they brought them here with them.
Exports of Libya's most emblematic products, namely dates, honey and olive oil, have been halted since 2017. A decree at the time said the suspension would be temporary to meet domestic market needs. But no date has yet been set to resume exports. Justifying the ban, an official in the Ministry of Agriculture said produce had been exported in bulk at low prices without adding value for the Libyan economy, leaving domestic demand for oil to be met by expensive imports.
Before Libya's independence, it was forbidden to turn olive trees into charcoal, and anyone who contravened this was severely punished. But now olive trees are torn up with impunity to make charcoal.
According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, Libya is the 11th largest olive producer in the world. The North African nation grows around 150,000 tons of the crop annually, but only 20% is turned into oil, well behind its neighbors Morocco, Tunisia and Algeria. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
It's 18:36 GMT, time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. China's central bank has cut cash reserve ratios for banks to boost economic activity. And personalized genetic analysis is gaining popularity in Japan. We'll explore why when we come back.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. These are the stories making headlines at this hour. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has departed from Ethiopia. He's now in Burkina Faso. He landed in the capital Ouagadougou on Friday evening. Now, while in the West African country, he will be meeting his Burkinabe counterpart. China and Burkina Faso agreed to re-establish formal ties in May last year. China supports Burkina Faso's efforts to fight terror and maintain stability in the country. The head of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohamed, has called for the results of the Democratic Republic of Congo's presidential vote to be respected. He made that plea in a tweet. The Congolese Election Commission says it's working hard to get provisional results ready by Sunday. A man is being treated in isolation in Sweden on suspicion of being infected with the Ebola virus after visiting Burundi. The chief medical officer at Sweden's Uppsala University Hospital says a young man had been in Burundi for about 3 weeks or so, and he was exhibiting classical symptoms of hemorrhagic fever, including vomiting blood. Test results are expected later on Friday. And finally, Zimbabwe's government seems to be on the verge of breaking deadlock with striking junior doctors following a meeting between the First Lady and leaders of the Hospital Doctors Association, which ended in a willingness, we're told, to put the patient first. Before this meeting, the government had invited applications for internship from candidates who've done at least 5 years in medical school in a bid to mitigate a national medical emergency. That's a run through your headlines. Now then, on to matters further afield. China's central bank has cut cash reserve ratios for banks by 100 basis points. Now, that reduction aims to boost economic activity by freeing up more cash for banks to then lend into the real economy. At this point, cash reserve ratios in the world's second largest economy stand at 14.5% for large banks, 12.5% for smaller ones. The reduction, though, is going to take place in 2 stages. There's a 50 basis point cut that takes effect from the 15th of January and another 50 basis point cut on the 25th. Still in the country, the central bank has also cut the requirements for the financial institutions to get targeted RRR cuts if they actively lend to SMEs. CGTN's Xie Cheng now explains.
The PBOC wants to further stimulate the private sector business activity. The Chinese central bank on Wednesday said that loans to small and micro-sized companies with a credit line of less than 10 million yuan or $1.46 million will qualify for targeted reserve requirement ratio cuts. That's up from the previous standard of 5 million yuan. That means more lenders will enjoy a discount on the RRR, including the bigger and more cash-rich ones, so that they are more confident to lend to smaller companies.
The change in credit line requirement means the potential boosts in cash and production growth for small companies will change, and the banks can create more SME loan products more willingly.
The indirect monetary easing may release up to 770 billion yuan of liquidity so that the overall economy can get a boost. That's according to CITIC Securities. The firm expects other measures to ease the funding squeeze ahead of the Chinese Lunar New Year, including RRR cuts and loans offered via targeted medium-term lending facility. China's largest investment bank, CICC, however, expects around 400 billion yuan of cash to be unleashed. In general, China last month dropped the word neutral from its monetary policy stance and said it'll strike an appropriate balance between tightening and loosening for 2019. Xia Cheng, CGTN.
Let's refocus on the trade war between the world's top 2 economies. Farmers in some states in the US have been hit pretty hard by this trade war. So hard, in fact, that they've been forced to write off their entire soybean crops due to bad weather, minimal storage, and a distressed market. CGTN's Dan Williams has that story.
With harvest out of the way and with the winter weather having arrived, there is little left for Fred Grider to do on his Illinois farm. He enjoyed a bumper yield this harvest. Those extra bushels were vital given the price of soybeans has now plunged to below the cost of production following the trade dispute between the US and China. But Grider knows other farmers will not be as lucky.
Yeah, it's hard to be optimistic, especially short term, with the inventories we've been carrying. You know, this was just kind of the last straw, so to speak, in the situation with the trade issues.
Another issue for farmers is storage capacity. This farm in central Illinois can store almost its entire harvest, but other farms are less fortunate.
In Louisiana, farmers are expected to lose as much as 15% of soybean crops. Some farmers have had to bury their crops under the ground. This is a pile of rotted soybeans. Bad weather during harvest, combined with a lack of storage facilities and a depressed market, has led many farmers to simply write off their crop. Although the situation is better in Illinois, some farmers are still working out ways to navigate those issues.
Storage is really a problem right now. Some farmers have even gone to storing soybeans in bags on top of the grounds. They're big 10,000 bushel bags. It's a little more tricky, but people are scrambling to figure out how to store soybeans in any way, shape, or form, hoping for a rally.
The extra pressure on US agriculture is a concern for the Illinois Farm Bureau, who now fear an increase in the number of farmers who will decide to simply throw in the towel.
So what we are expecting to see this winter is an increase in farm sales, and probably an increase in the percentage of those that were more or less involuntary sales. For those farms that are going to have to make that decision, it's a very dark day.
Dan Williams, CGTN, Bellflower, Illinois.
On to Japan now, where DNA testing to pre-screen for disease is growing in popularity. In one of the fastest aging societies in the world, people are taking matters into their own hands in search of a long and healthy life. Our correspondent Mayu Yoshida has more on this trend.
Yusuke Kawase is eating more vegetables and less fatty food these days. He has changed his eating habits after a DNA test recently revealed he's at risk of contracting esophageal cancer. Both of his grandparents also suffered from the disease.
Before I got my DNA tested, I would just eat meat or rice. But after I got the results, I started to exercise more and eat more vegetables because I wanted to stay fit and watch my daughter grow old. My wish is to walk on my own feet until the day before I die.
Like many Japanese, Kawase believes in pimpin korori, which means to stay healthy until you drop dead. That's why in this health-conscious aging society, there's growing demand for home DNA testing kits. Testing firms like Genesis are benefiting from the trend. The company has screened DNA samples for more than 600,000 users since 2004.
In Japan, people are very focused on health life expectancy. It's not about living a long life, but about how long you can stay fit and be active. Japanese users are using DNA kits to prevent cancer risks or delay diseases so they can boost health expectancy.
In exchange for a salvia sample, this DNA kit will reveal clues to more than 300 types of illnesses, diseases, and allergies, including over 30 types of cancer. It'll also give you dieting and beauty care tips based on your DNA. All I need to do is mail in my DNA sample in this envelope and wait for the results in about a month. The global direct-to-consumer genetic testing sector is expected to triple over the next 5 years to a $300 million market. In Japan, recent data suggests the market will grow into a $59 million market by 2022. Analysts say growth will depend on how effective DNA testing will be in solving Japan's demographic issues.
For now, home DNA test kits can only alert risks to individual users. But once we take these findings and cross-reference them into more systematical data, we can use these technologies to prevent diseases. This will help reduce social security spending because Japan's health insurance costs are ballooning as the population grows older.
At the moment, there are no legal restrictions on home genetic testing in Japan.
But officials are raising concerns over the quality of some DNA testing kits. And skeptics say test results may screen for predisposed illnesses, but it's still up to the person to lead a healthy lifestyle. For some, though, it may be comforting to know than to not know what's in their genes. Mai Yoshida, CGTN, Tokyo.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. Oil, it seems, is having a very interesting session, trying to recover essentially from the losses that we saw from around October into the end of 2018. 58.5 is a relevant number over there. The tax row, though, in Zambia between the authorities here and the mining companies, that still continues. The head of the country's tax authority claims that, on balance, mining firms owe the state more than the $550 to $600 million due to them in value-added tax refunds. The DRA commissioner, though, didn't specify exactly how much mining firms do owe the state. We'll keep an eye on that story and plenty more here on the program. Here's what's coming up tonight. We'll bring you the story of a tailor who's provided an exquisite look to Egyptians for decades.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. On a rather lighter note, a family-owned retail outlet in Egypt has been in operation for many decades, providing custom-tailored shirts to the public. This shop once served wealthy Egyptians during the time of the late president, Gamal Abdel Nasser.
Makram Williams strives to promote individuality and self-expression through his custom-made shirts. The family-owned retail shop was established by his father in 1967, catering to individuals who want to make a statement through fashion.
During the days of my father, he used to work with artists such as Mohammed Abdel Wahab. He also worked with Dr. Taha Hussein. He used to work with President Gamal Abdel Nasser, as well as people in government institutions and diplomats. They are all well known. I took over after him. I used to deal with Mr. Farid al-Atrash, people who are very chic.
The shop's clientele has featured famous authors, actors, diplomats, and even presidents. With his vintage shop, William hopes to preserve his father's legacy in the current competitive market. He exports his custom-made shirts to Europeans who value the locally sourced Egyptian cotton material. Even though machines produce more merchandise, the detail and finish produced through manual tailoring is evident.
Back in the day, tailors used to hold a fitting for shirts, just like they did with suits. The Italians used to be here, so were the Armenians, holding fittings for shirts until they reached the best fit. That is when they deliver it to you. The shirts were handmade, they did not only use machines. The machine gives you products faster, it throws products right at you. Handmade work, however, gives you less merchandise, but delivers high-quality products. That is the secret of our industry. I hope that we can preserve it and teach it.
William sees a place for art in the tailoring business, despite cheaper, ready-made imports dominating the Egyptian market.
The man working in the shirt business has to be an artistic man. He has to be a craftsman. He has to be a skilled man to be able to produce good merchandise.
At his downtown Cairo store, the grey-haired tailor continues to follow in his father's footsteps, treating the process of shirt making like an art. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Over in Nigeria, there's a growing army of young innovators who are pushing the boundaries of that country's digital economy. The north of the country is also home to an increasing number of startups, tech startups, with big dreams of solving pressing social and humanitarian problems. CGTN's Samson Omale filed this report.
These people are the young drivers of Nigeria's future digital economy. They are keen to find ways around barriers and to provide solutions with coding, software development, hardware maintenance, animation, and data management.
Well, I think the ecosystem has been growing and is growing rapidly. Like in April, we did our ecosystem map in 2.2 and we recorded over 80 hubs. But currently we have over 100 hubs in Nigeria. That tells you a lot.
David Dasar is a 35-year-old CEO of one of northern Nigeria's most successful innovation hubs. 3 years after launching his startup, he says he's excited that young coding experts and software developers are already working for blue-chip companies in Europe remotely from Jos, north-central Nigeria.
Okay, we do incubation. So we have an incubation aspect where we incubate startups. So what we do basically is to help startups from ideation to validation state. And then we have the tech outsourcing unit where companies come to hire talents from here, either remotely or physically.
To provide an environment for innovators to test their ideas and showcase their products, this annual tech conference called the Hackathon also provides potential investors an opportunity to bring new developers on board.
Technology and innovation are transforming Nigeria's entrepreneurship models. Experts say this tech revolution can reshape Nigeria's economy if and only if government provides the right kind of support.
The policy is not allowing the telcos, telecommunication companies, basically, to go into that market. We still have an issue of financial inclusion.
Africa tech startups raised about $195 million in 2018, according to Disrupt Africa. Thus thought to be the most raised since it started tracking funds coming into the tech sector in Africa. And Nigeria hopes it can be a continental leader, with that trend set to continue. Samson Omale, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Now, an entrepreneur in South Africa has set up an agro-processing plant for beetroot. Now, in a country where the unemployment rate is well over 27%, this is a kind of risk-taking, job-creating venture that Africa's most industrialized economy desperately needs. Here's CGTN's Yoli Sanjamela with the story of TM Foods.
Trifina Musomane started her company in 2014. The company started off as a mere idea. The mother of 4 was unemployed and needed a plan to ensure that her family has sustenance.
I started it there as an idea, trying to come up with different recipes, trying to get it right until the end of 2014, where I started doing the trial and error thing, whereby we started doing the actuality. We doing the actual process, and then the very same 2014 we moved to 2015, whereby we started putting that idea into reality. We started pushing up, trying to get people that will assist us to make sure that the idea that we were thinking of, we implement it.
She also noticed that beetroot is only available in its original format and believed that she could leverage on what was already available on the market.
Looking at the area where I am at Sishiru and around Limpopo province, there's no any other person that is doing the kind of product that I wanted to start, and I saw it as a potential and as an opportunity for the market for me.
She would soon find out that being an entrepreneur is not a bed of roses, especially if you're a woman.
Sometimes as a woman, you know, you tell people that you want to do the agro-processing. Some, they just look at you and think you are crazy. But I never lost hope. I kept on pushing until I led those people to understand exactly, because I had a zeal of what I wanted to do.
After 4 years of endeavors, Musomane has been able to create a healthy demand for her products.
Our product has 6 flavors. We have the original flavor, we have hot, we have chutney, we have ginger, we have garlic, and we have cinnamon. So it excites the people, and then it's something new, and it's doing very well, and people like to experience or taste something new.
The company is able to meet its customer demands even though they currently work manually. She now employs a number of people from this rural province in the northern parts of South Africa.
One of my biggest joy was that I wanted to see that the unemployed youth that are not working in the community, they get work opportunities, and I'm happy to announce that I've employed 12 people that are working with us here at TM Foods.
In the past 4 years, she's managed to expand and offer her products to different markets. Musumane now supplies many stores with her products and has recently landed a deal with one of the largest retail companies in the country, Spar.
I take my hat off to people that want to better themselves and go into business, because retail is a tough business. The product is very, very popular. It's selling good. The customer love it because it's handmade, and you can see there's love that's going into the product.
Musumane supplies over 25 other local stores. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Seshego, Limpopo province in South Africa.
Right, and as we wrap up the program, just before we jump into the currencies, a quick run through the PMI data here for you. So that December reading for PMIs, we're going to bring up the currencies here relatively quickly, was pretty interesting. So it essentially came in at 49 points, but that is not bad news. Yes, it's in contraction territory, but it's higher than November's reading of 48.2, which suggests that the growth we saw in the third quarter might be carrying through into the fourth. Not a definitive call though. The Rand also posting a rather impressive performance. Before this, I was going to say that the Rand was actually about 14.93, but it's actually posted some decent numbers. It's broken into the high 13s in the last hour or so. 13.9605 is the relevant number, bringing its essentially its gain so far in there to about 3 percentage points or so against the dollar. Will it hold on to those gains? We'll find out. These are your currencies, and that has been tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content that you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us. All of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.